So I was glad to hear that Michelle has also been spending a lot more time in her nearby nature during this time, because that's exactly what I've been doing too. I've been spending lots of afternoons these last few months on my small fenced-in concrete patio, tending to my assortment of plants. Maybe some of you have done the same. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment near downtown LA in Koreatown, and this tiny patio and these small plants, especially during this time, have given me such a sense of purpose. We've got some succulents, a flowering bush, an aloe plant, and even a very young potted lemon tree. This daily act of care for these little green things, some prickly, some fuzzy, some brightly colored, some less so, has become an important spiritual practice amid all of the change and the grief and the anger. And our reading for me today, however we connect with those words, I think teaches us that God, that spirit, this grand connectedness reside in these everyday practices. Our interconnectedness, our harmonious relationship to the world around us is far more expansive and bright than we could ever imagine. I think it's all too easy to forget that. Gibran writes, "Your daily life is your temple and your religion. Whenever you enter into it, take with you your all." He encourages us to remember that the ripples of the Spirit are all around us. He says, "Look about you and you shall see the Spirit playing with your children. And look into space and you shall see God walking in the cloud, outstretching arms in the lightning and descending in rain. We shall see the Spirit smiling in flowers, then rising and waving hands in trees." Creation, the natural world, has a lot to teach us about harmony, if we're willing to see it. This idea of harmony has always been a really abstract thing for me. Sure, it sounds beautiful musically. It was a major theme of my kindergarten classroom. But my understanding of harmony took a turn a couple of years ago, as I learned through experience just how radical and challenging this concept of harmony can be, and how needed it is in this moment, in our communities, and in our country. And yes, I learned about radical harmony through the dirt, through the plants in my yard and yours too. You see, I learned that in some biospheres, the plant life exists as a collective. When one species or section of species has an overabundance of resources, and it notices that another section or another species has too little, that group of flowers or trees or grass, whatever it may be, will share that overabundance through their roots. Can you believe that? And I know maybe some of you here are scientists or environmentalists or gardeners, and you're thinking, yeah, thanks, Liz, we already knew that. But I know it sounds so unbelievably simple, but I ask that you stick with me for a second here and think about it again. This plant has the ability to recognize it has more than enough, and it has the ability to share that resource with its neighbor, who might be 10 feet taller, or 20 shades bluer, or much pricklier in texture. And it does it. It does it. It shares with other beings different from itself and its species merely because it can. No questions asked, no strings attached. I think there is something prophetic about that simple fact, something divine, a spark of divinity, perhaps. And it's also such a much needed reminder during this time when our lives depend on trusting one another. when any illusion of rugged individualism has come crashing down, when giving up certain comforts, certain privileges for the benefit of the rest. When we pull back from some of the things we've been taught to expect in the world, whether that we are fundamentally alone, that we're never good enough, that asking for help is wrong, we just might be surprised what we find. When we trust in the world around us, when we trust in drawing the circle wider, we might just find a sense of connectedness, of spiritual calm, of centeredness. Our seventh UU principle calls us to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. It's a wonderful recognition of the universalism that is a major theological legacy of ours. It's a recognition of that great love that holds us all in life, human and plant alike. And aren't we in a time when we could use a little more harmony? In thinking about harmony this week, I recalled a time when I was able to really feel that principle playing out in my life. When I was able to allow creation, to allow the natural world to share its overabundance with me when I most needed it. As a kid growing up in Western Pennsylvania, my grandmother would pay me a nickel for every weed I pulled in her garden. In the summer heat, I would mountaineer my way up her steep sloping garden, her leather gloves falling off my tiny hands, her weed digger resting tightly in my right and her squishy knee rest in my left. I tore her garden up, digging each weed out with heaps of fertile soil along with it. I don't know, my best haul probably amounted to $3, but I never left with fewer than 15. She would pretend to be doing other chores while I worked hard. Her chores mostly pertain to making some lemonade for me and quietly following my steps, pulling the little weeds I had overlooked. But every time I finished, I knew there was a "good job, Lizzie," a glass of lemonade, and a strong pat on the shoulder awaiting my pitiful bounty. She probably knew that her green thumb gene had passed me right over, but she never once let on. She always had a good excuse to finish up early every afternoon. She would say, "It's too hot out here. Why don't you come help me with the border of this puzzle? I think you've got them all. I just can't believe it." And as we all do, over time, I grew up, and my grandmother's garden no longer required my services. By my mid-20s, I had moved away, I had started a career, and my grandmother eventually passed away, the beloved matriarch of our family. The winter after she died, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time. All I could bear to do was sit under the big pine tree that set roots right next to her headstone. I realized it was only fitting for her to have this small piece of nature with her always. The weeds poking through the snow, the roots deepening around her. She would have liked it that way. And not long after that winter, I was taking a walk with my roommate's dog around my neighborhood. I was aimless and grieving, thinking about those summers weeding in her garden. And as the dog paused to smell the roses, a butterfly flew out of the bush and over to me. It landed right on my left shoulder, just next to my ear. Together, this tiger-colored insect and I stood for a moment or two, transfixed, neither of us moving an inch. On that summer day, I just knew it was another one of my grandmother's pats on the shoulders. I could just feel it. It's as if this insect was whispering to me, "It's too hot out here. Why don't you come help me with the border of this puzzle? I think you've got them all. I can't believe it." It flitted away off into the tall bushes, standing next to me. They did look like they could use some tending to, and I would have offered, but I smiled in turn, knowing that I had enough of my grandmother's nickels to last me a lifetime. As I think about this moment now, I like to think that the butterfly was sharing with me, reminding me it's okay to be sad, because tomorrow will come, the sun will rise, and we can be grateful for that sun-like love and warmth that we've had. In fact, we can share it with one another when those around us most need it. When I needed it, this tiny insect gave me the gift of connection, of a divine recognition of our connectedness to all around us, but also to all those who've gone before us. So, church, my question to you this morning is, how can you be like those flowers in your garden and the insects in your yard? Those flowers that share their overabundance without question, who take that little bit of help when they need it without shame or embarrassment. We don't have to flatten our differences, the things that make us, us, to live into the spirit of the collective. It'd be such a shame to scuttle or hide away those differences among us. Got to think they're there for a reason. Can we recognize when our sense of difference is blotting out our chance to be grateful for what is and can be? A chance to really feel in our bones that sense of interconnectedness, that ripple of the Spirit. The divine, the Spirit of life, does not dwell only in the parts of us that are most acceptable or most beautiful or most intriguing to others. That spark dwells in the totality of who we are and in the totality of creation, including in the gardens in our backyards, or like in my case, the jade plant on my patio. This work of harmony is anything but simple. It requires a recognition of the advantages and disadvantages each one of us has in life. It requires us to choose community over self. It requires so much love and patience. And yet the movements of this moment are calling us into this very thing. And this morning, I invite you to consider how you are responding to this call of radical harmony. Church, may we model the way creation, the way the natural world recognizes that we're all connected by our roots on this planet. And that those roots are made for connection, are made for sharing, are made for the collective that we embody. The ripples of the Spirit connect us to the grand love that surrounds us and is within us always. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.